Hi, creative friends. This is Soraya, and thank you so much for being here. So, I'm really excited to do this video today, but I'm also really nervous because it's about Dr. Clarissa Pinkola Estes and her book, Women Who Run with the Wolves. So, I'm also really nervous because I don't want to mess it up because this is her work, this is her life, this is her breath, this is her soul, this is her heart, and I don't want to screw it up. So, I decided that the best way to approach this is to just share the lessons that I have learned in her readings and in the listening of her audiobooks and her work, and then how they apply to my life and how I have used them and grown from them and been nurtured by them. So I decided that the best way to approach her work is in like a series of different videos because she's got so many audiobooks, and this book in and of itself is worthy of like I don't know how many videos, none of which I am qualified to talk about in an academic sense, but I can talk about it on a soul heart level. So that's what I'm going to do. So the very first thing I want to do is I want to just say that if there are any men who are watching this video, please read this book. This is a book that is about the female psyche, the ways that the female has been socialized, raised, the way relationships and culture and society and love and belief systems have impacted the female psyche, but it is also for men. It is for anybody who is a human being. And if you are a man and if you love a woman, whether that woman is your mother, your wife, your sister, your daughter, your granddaughter, a friend, then if you read this book, it may give you some insight into how to love this woman more, to comfort her, to support her, to be there for her, to help her help herself. So, not that you need that as a reason to read this book, because if you're a man and you want to access the female energies within yourself so you can become more integrated, so you can become a stronger, more loving, wiser soul, then please read this book. um, so that being said, I am going to share a little bit about the life of Dr. Clarissa Pinkola Estes. And I'm hoping that by doing so, it's not merely for interest's sake, but I'm hoping that you will see how she took these threads of gold that were actually what society would label as negatives, and she turned them into a garment that is made out of gold and jewels, and she has blanketed the whole of humanity. And for generations to come, this book is simply amazing. So, Dr. Clarissa Pinkola Estes is a very reclusive person. Not a lot is known about her and her personal life. But if you listen to her audiobooks, she will share in the telling of her stories, in the telling of her life's work. She will share parts of her childhood and the events that shaped her life. So the very first thing is, if you go into Google and you go Dr. Clarissa Pinkola Estes, there are not many images that are going to come up. And the ones that do are going to be from many, many years ago. You're not even going to really know her true age. Um, there are, there's a range of, is she 71? Is she 79? Is she in her 80s? Like, nobody knows. Not that her age matters. I'm just trying to make a point that she is a very reclusive person and not a lot is known about her. And maybe she doesn't even know a lot about her early childhood. So, on the face of it, it would seem that, Dr. Clarissa Pinkola Estes. So, by her last name, it would seem that she is Hispanic or, Mexican or from Spain or whatever. So, that is only partially true. So she was born to mestizo, I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, Mexicans. Her parents were migrant workers. They were illiterate, and she was with them until she was about 3 or 4 years old. After that, she was given up for adoption. Now, nobody knows what happened. Was she abandoned by her parents? Did her parents pass away and there was nobody left to care for her? Like, nobody has any idea what happened, and maybe she doesn't even know what happened. But she was put up for adoption and she was taken in by a family of Eastern European immigrants. They were also illiterate, and she was brought up in an area of the Great Plains, a very, very small town that probably had like under 1,000 people. And it was a very tight knit community. So here we have a person who is uh, Dr. Clarissa Pinkola Estes. Okay. So she went on to get her doctorate, a Jungian psychologist, and a New York Times bestselling author. And, I could go on and on and on about her. But here she is being raised by her birth family who are illiterate and then by her adopted family who are also illiterate. Now, on the face of it, it would seem like this is a huge negative. Oh my God, for a child to be brought up by illiterate people, that would impact their psyche, their education, et cetera, et cetera. But I want you to take this little bit of information and just store it in, the back of your mind. We're going to come back to it. But these are the little threads of gold that, I'm talking about. So let's move on now to her after she gets adopted by her Eastern European family. She is taken under their wing, and she has an extended aunt who is Native American, and she talks a lot about her in her audiobooks. She weaves her into her stories. So now you've got mestizo, Mexican. Now you've got Eastern European. Now you've got a little bit of Native American. And so, we're going on in her life now. She is maybe perhaps she has what teachers classify as a learning disability or learning difficulties. She's a late bloomer. She goes on to in her 20s. And what we do know about her is she has a couple of children. I think it's two children. We don't know if she got married, if her husband died, if she got divorced, but she goes through a period where she is suffering a lot. She has financial difficulties. She's baking bread, making food, and going door to door and selling it. She's the single mom of two young kids. She's going to college on the side. And that was her 20s. So again, put this vein of gold in the back of your mind and just kind of, well, we're going to come back to it. So now we go into her 30s, and she starts working on her, her master's, her PhD. And like I said, she's a late bloomer. She's now in her 40s, and she starts, putting together her Women Who Run with the Wolves, the manuscript, etc. She sends it out to 41 different publishers. It gets rejected 41 times. Okay. And again, put this little bit of information in the back of your mind. And the 42nd time a publisher takes a chance on her, she gets it published, and it's on the New York Times best-selling list for, I think, about 2 years. It's required reading in many, many university classes, which is how I came across this book when I was about 18 or 19 years old. So I think when she was about 43, 44, 45, a little bit of stability comes into her life. She, gets her PhD. She's on the New York Times bestselling list. She signs a contract in her 40s with Sounds True, which is where all her audiobooks are published through them. And she kind of acquires a cult like following little by little, and I was one of those just luckiest people at the age of 18, where my university professor from one of my classes says, okay, you got to read this book. And even though I only could understand 5 or 10% of it, there was enough in here that sustained me, that kept me coming back again and again and again. And each time I have read a chapter or a paragraph or a sentence, I get a whole new level of understanding, a whole new level of meaning. And let us get back to Dr. Clarissa Pinkola Estes and what I was talking about, all these little bits and nuggets of gold, why they are so important. And even if there's one person listening who has experienced this in their life, I want you to listen to how she weaved all these different things together, because it has helped me. And I've used that as a blueprint for my life in so many ways. So, like I said, she has been brought up by two sets of illiterate parents or families, whatever. Now, because they were illiterate when she was about 4 or 5, this is her adoptive family, she was not reading books, not watching television, but she was listening to stories in the oral storytelling tradition of Eastern European fairy tales, folklore. And because she had an extended aunt that was Native American, that's another oral tradition, culture, tribe. And she was listening to these stories. And that was how she spent her childhood, not reading and writing, but listening to these stories. And that is basically her life's work. She takes fairy tales, folklore, stories, whether it's this book or her audiobook, and she uses these fairy tales as a vehicle for mining the female psyche, showing us through using Jungian psychology. So it's very, very academic, but using a very simplified way of just speaking to your heart and speaking to your soul. So she gets to the root of things. So she took what society would view as a huge negative, being brought up by illiterate parents, family, and she turned that into gold. She now goes on, she might have a learning um, deficiency or difficulty or disability, or she might just be a late bloomer because she was brought up by people who were illiterate. And so when she went to school, they were reading and writing. They weren't really, doing oral storytelling. That's what she was, she probably had a PhD in that by the time she was 10 years old, because that was her whole life up to then. But, nobody knows what happened, but she was a late bloomer. And then she goes on and she suffers in her 20s. There's not a lot that's written about this, and there's not a lot that's known about it, but she was a single mom. She, by all accounts, had no support. She was going to school, working. She didn't have a profession, very young. And she was humble. She knew what she wanted to do. She put one step in front of another. And if you are in this position now, or if you have been in this position, I just would urge you to look at her life and how she brought all of these threads together. And maybe it was everything that she went through in her 20s and 30s that allowed her, when she sent out this book 41 times and it got rejected each and every time. But there was something in her that said, you know what? I am going to send it out again. I am going to send out the second manuscript. I'm going to send it out again, the second one, the third time, the fourth time, up to 42 times. That's a lot of tenacity. That's a lot of belief in yourself. So maybe it was all of those steps that came before that led to the next step. So in this way, she took so many negatives, what, society would view as negatives, and she turned them into positives. And I'm going to share with you how I use that in my life, in a very, like, in one way that I use this in my life. So it's no, I'm not trying to hide the fact that I come from a very abusive family of origin. I have an Instagram account. I'm taking a bit of a hiatus from it right now, but I've had it for, I don't know, 10, 12 years. And I have written numerous posts on me healing from my very toxic, abusive family of origin. And I also have generational trauma as well, very patriarchal, very misogynistic, very just confining, especially to women, especially to children, especially to girl children. So I talk about a lot of that on my Instagram. And before I had an Instagram account, I have a blog, and I'm sure it's still somewhere out there in the um, on the internet. And again, at length, I have talked about my abusive family, me healing from it, addressing these issues, etc., etc. So when I was in my teens, I looked around me, and there was no one in my family, in my extended family, in my community, that I had as a mentor. There was nobody. There was nobody that I could look to for strength. There was nobody that I could look to that I wanted to model my life on. Everybody that I saw was a what I have the terminology for now was operating from a wounded feminine psychology. But there was nobody that, I could look up to have as a mentor. So by the time I was 18 or 19, and by the time I got to this book right here, I was absolutely starving. My psyche was starving for truth, for strength, for wisdom, for a guidebook. Um, I wasn't looking for somebody to guide me to their truth. I was looking for somebody to help me, to guide me to my own truth so that I could forge a path for myself. And because I had no mentors, I actually had the best mentors because I was so starving for blueprints of how to live my life of a strong, wise, loving, vulnerable, intelligent female, with operating from from the creative force. I got to have the best mentors. I got to have mentors like Dr. Clarissa Pinkola Estes. I got to have mentors like Patricia Hill Collins, Bell Hooks, Audre Lorde. These were women who were beautiful, strong, vulnerable, brilliant. Toni Morrison. I mean, I could go on and on and on. Whether um, these mentors came to me via my university professor saying, well, you have to read this book, or a friend saying, hey, you should read this book, or somebody gifting me a book, or me coming across a documentary about one of these women. I had the absolute best mentors. If I hadn't been so deprived, so starving for this knowledge, I wouldn't have been open to receiving as much of this information as I could have. So I hope that you try to look at your life as well in a subjective manner, and to look at the ways that you can turn what Dr. Clarissa Pinkola Estes, what she calls the overculture. The overculture means society, the ways that we have been conditioned, brainwashed into thinking, oh, this is a negative. So try to look at the things that you might have perceived as a negative because you were socialized into looking at it that way. But seeing how you can now turn that into a positive, see how you can take, a little bit of this and a little bit of that and a little bit of this, and mixing it up in your own way and making it into something beautiful, like Dr. Estes did. She has this mestizo Mexican heritage combined with Eastern European heritage. She's got a dash of, Native American. She's got, maybe she had a learning disability. Maybe she's a late bloomer. Maybe, she's suffering and struggling and living in poverty in her 20s, being a single mom, being on the outcasts and the fringes of society. Then she goes on to become, gets her PhD, and she becomes a New York Times bestseller. And she just takes all of these elements and she makes it into a blueprint that only she can make, because nobody has all these elements, to think, okay, you're going to combine this and this and this. Like, that's just a part of her. She doesn't have to go looking for it. It's just um, who she is. So see if you can take these little bits and pieces that are only things that you have. Nobody else has it. Nobody can copy you because nobody has this. And that's what I've done. I go, okay, I have this, okay, I'm Indian, I'm of Indian heritage. So I've got this, like, okay, I'm Hindu, but, I'm also Canadian. And then uh, I don't know, there's all these things, and I have this very toxic, abusive childhood, and I have this and I have that. And, but I was born in South Africa. And like, you put all these little pieces together and you have a recipe that is only uniquely you. And I hope that by doing this series, because it's going to have to be a series about Dr. Estes, that I can share um, what I have learned from her works. And I come to her work as a seeker and as a student. And all the mistakes that I make in the sharing of what I have learned, they are my mistakes. They are not her mistakes. So I hope that I can share what I have learned, what I know, what I apply, how I've applied them, how I have used them. And I hope that this can help somebody out there. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.